Hi. For our final project, I decided to work on the race bias in infants and build upon the core course reading from Social and Personality Development, Psych 413, of Donametal's work titled From American City to Japanese Village, a cross-cultural investigation of implicit race attitudes. Um, the research leading up, into this on race bias and social preferences um, suggests that such things start to emerge in the first year of life, and that preferring to look at or interact with those that are familiar over others does not necessarily indicate an ability to form abstract and inductively rich social categories. Um, Using the violation of expectation looking time methods, studies provide clear evidence that infants can form conceptually rich social categories, and that infants use social group boundaries to guide their inductive generalizations and expectations about um, social relationships, and that most importantly, social categorization and social preferences are each malleable based on input, experience, and interventions, suggesting that prejudice may not be inevitable, which is the foundation for the novel study that I've come up with. Um, so Leroy put it best, stating that forming conceptually rich social categories helps people navigate the complex structure of the social world by allowing them to reason about the likely thoughts, beliefs, actions, and interactions of others as guided by group membership. So social categorization can often have nefarious consequences. And that's what I'm going to try to build upon, is how we can prevent that. But by coming up with some studies, a study that has important findings about the onset and effect of race bias. We suggest that the foundation of the human ability to form useful social categorizations is in place in infancy, and that social categories guide the inferences that infants make about the shared characteristics and social relationships of other people. It also suggests that the ability to form abstract social categories may be separable from the eventual negative downstream consequences of social categorization that include prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping. Um, Although a tendency to form inductively rich social categories appears early in ontogeny, prejudice based on each particular category dimension may not be inevitable. So Donna et al.'s investigation found that the cultural opinions of preferred outgroups become more positive as people age, suggesting that the more people learn, the more accepting they become. Their findings unveiled important information about the early development of implicit and explicit race preference in both cultures, but failed to address how these trends compared to many other cultures and the world population as a whole, and how this information could be used to imply interventions or changes in behavior that might be more conducive to an all-inclusive, all race-inclusive attitude or environment. So the first, I found many articles that were related to race bias in infants, and the first of the four that I decided to use. Before I get into that, I'm sorry, I would like to expand upon how one of the four primary goals of Dunham et al.'s research was to discover how trends compare across age and culture in terms of implicit and explicit attitudes. And so the first study that I found was called Infants Rely on Gaze Cues from Own Race Other Infants rely more on gaze cues from own race than other race adults for learning under uncertainty. And the important findings were that infants followed own race gaze over other race gaze, and that this was found observing eye gazing, obviously, while infants watched own and other race conditions to see if they preferred social cues from the same race over other race adults to anticipate events. The results found that infants in the first year of life were biased to use social cues coming from adults of the same race over another race under situations of uncertainty. The second study that I discovered, and I should mention that I found all my research doing journal searches that shared some combination of the words infant, implicit, race, and preference. And so the second study that I found was titled, Do Infants Show Social Preferences for People Differing in Race? And it aimed to discover how infants develop social preferences based on their social group membership. And it tested this by observing the toy sharing preferences in same versus other race dynamics. It would measure how often children that were playing together or infants would try to steal toys from other race versus same race counterparts. Since 5-year-olds displayed more explicit preference for same race individuals, it leads us to believe that social preferences based on race must emerge between 2.5 to 5 years old. The third study that I found was titled Infant Attention to Same and Other Race Faces by Singaraha et al. And it aimed to see if race preferences in infants was based on level of diversity in immediate social environments, and if infant scanning techniques differed by race in the sense of how they recognize people. Similarly, the method involved eye tracking to be observed and recorded in the gazing of infants presented with pairs of same and other race faces. So one presented with 2 different pictures of 2 different races, see where they look the most and at what parts of the face they look the most. And the results implied that race-based visual attention in infancy is closely related to the larger society's racial and ethnic composition, but that race-based recognition is more closely aligned with the infant's immediate social environments. The last article that I found that I decided to include was titled Caucasian Infants Scan Own and Other Race Faces Differently, and aimed to discover if infants aged 6 to 10 months scanned the same and other races' faces in different manners, and what parts were most important for recognition. It also hoped to find why own race face recognition emerges so early. And once again, it tested using recording eye tracking observations while infants watched clips that involved own race versus other race. And the results showed that infants look more and more with increasing age at the eyes of the same race faces for recognition versus the mouths of other races for recognition. So this leads me to, these articles all lead to establish a good baseline for the development of same-race bias in infants, but they all fail to address how discovering the exact age and mechanisms for race bias could help determine an intervention that may lead to a more race-inclusive attitude at later stages in life. And I basically come up with a study that might help us learn when race bias behaviors might start to emerge and how that information can be used to create more lifelong lifelong, all-inclusive race attitudes. Basically, my study is to observe how children and infants react to the support from same race versus other race. Basically, how a child or an infant will react to seeing a child in distress being helped by the same race versus the other race, or maybe a child being breastfed by same race mother versus an other race wet nurse, or how a child responds to same race interaction versus multiracial interaction or other race interaction, and basically what they look at most attentively. First, we recruit infant parents and other adults and evaluate their personal implicit and explicit dispositions about race, just to make sure that we had a good cohesive group to be tested. We would ask about explicit dispositions of in-group race bias through questionnaires and self-reporting, and then implicit dispositions could be tested through a rating of pictures of good to bad, 1 to 5, and then after a baseline is created, rating pictures of race based on 1 to 5, and then anybody who scored high on implicit race bias, like a 5 or higher, say, would be eliminated from the study, just so that they wouldn't affect the results for a more generalized population. The method would be to use a violation of expectation looking time to observe how long patients watched videos or conditions of same race helping same race versus other race helping that same race, or other race helping other race. And the results, I think, would give us a more by comparing different age groups of infants and children, we would find the results would show us at what age looking times change based on race bias or preference, and then that information could be used to introduce more race-inclusive attitudes and behaviors that could benefit society as a whole by helping to try to prevent downstream negative consequences such as prejudice, discrimination, and stereotyping. I believe that the core foundation of the study is basically to determine, like I said, what age we can help infants become more all-inclusive and more accepting. And the hypothesis would be that by introducing more diverse environments early in age, children would stop not develop so much own race preference and prevent the negative consequences of own race bias. I think that studies like this could be very beneficial to creating a more all-inclusive society, as we can see and help prevent things that we see in the news, like the March on Charleston, or things in history like segregation and white supremacy. I hope that the findings of such a study would lead to a better future for the children. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate this semester.